first time it happened, I told myself not to take it personally. After all, kids can be cruel without realizing it, especially when they think they're just being funny. But the memory of that moment still clung to me. The sting of humiliation etched deep in my chest. I had walked into the living room with the brightest smile on my face, holding the gift I had saved up for, something I thought my son would treasure. His friends were sprawled out on the couch, controllers in hand, their laughter bouncing off the walls as they played their video games. I cleared my throat and held the small box toward him, my heart racing with anticipation. "Daniel," I said, my voice softer than I intended, "I got something for you." He glanced at me, his expression already impatient, as though I had interrupted something more important than me. His friends' eyes turned toward us, curiosity sparking in their smirks. Daniel took the box with a dramatic sigh, opened it, and when he saw what was inside, his lips curled, not into a smile of gratitude, but into a sneer of disbelief. "You actually bought me this," he said, his voice loud enough for his friends to hear. He held it up, dangling it between two fingers as though it were a piece of trash. It was a wristwatch. Not an expensive one, but something sturdy, classic, and meaningful. I had engraved his initials on the back, thinking he would wear it proudly. His friends erupted into laughter. One of them slapped his knee, nearly falling off the couch. "Dude, that looks like something my grandpa would wear." The heat rose to my face as Daniel joined in, laughing harder than all of them, shaking his head as though I had just performed some absurd joke. "Dad, what were you thinking?" he chuckled, tossing the box back into my hands like it was nothing. "I don't wear watches. Nobody my age does. We have phones, remember?" They laughed again, and this time, my son's laughter cut through me like a knife. I forced a smile, the kind of brittle expression that feels like it might shatter if held for too long. "Right?" I murmured, clutching the box to my chest. "Of course." Silly me. I retreated to the kitchen, my shoulders heavy, my throat tight. I could still hear them laughing as I closed the door, the sound echoing in my skull. The watch, the gift I had imagined him wearing to school, showing proudly to his friends, sat cold in my hand. I slipped it back into the box and placed it carefully in the drawer beside the sink. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I tried to remind myself that he was 16, caught in that awkward age between boy and man, where appearances mattered more than anything else. Maybe I was old-fashioned, out of touch, clinging to tokens of value that meant little in his world. But the way he had laughed, it wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was mockery. And the fact that it happened in front of his friends, well, that burned worst of all. I stopped buying him little surprises after that. When I passed a store and saw something I thought he might like, I kept walking. When I got my paycheck and considered setting aside money for him, I let the thought die before it could bloom. Instead, I saved quietly, pushing every spare dollar into an envelope hidden deep in my dresser. If he didn't appreciate what I gave freely, then maybe one day he would learn the value of what I held back. The months slipped by, each day marked by a distance that grew wider between us. He came home late, locked in his room with his headphones on, barely acknowledging me beyond the occasional grunt. I told myself it was just a phase, that he would come around. But sometimes, when I caught a glimpse of him in the hallway, I saw a boy who had once clung to my hand in the grocery store, asking for candy with those wide, pleading eyes. Where had that boy gone? And when had he turned into this stranger who found amusement in humiliating me? Then came the night everything changed. It was 3 months later, a damp evening in November, when he stormed into the house, his face pale, his hands trembling. He was alone this time. No laughter, no friends trailing behind him. He didn't even acknowledge me as he rushed upstairs, his footsteps heavy and frantic. I heard the slam of his door, followed by silence. At first, I thought it was just teenage drama. Maybe he had fought with a friend or a girlfriend. I tried not to interfere. But hours later, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, the house cloaked in darkness, except for the glow of the single overhead light. His face was buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Daniel?" I asked, approaching cautiously. "What's wrong?" He looked up at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw raw fear in his eyes. His lips parted, trembling, as though he didn't know where to begin. And then he whispered, barely audible, "Dad, I need help. Please." I froze, my heart pounding. He hadn't called me Dad with that kind of desperation since he was a child. I sat across from him, waiting, watching as he took a deep breath, and finally spoke the words that would set everything in motion. "I need that watch." My world stilled in that moment. The very same gift he had mocked, laughed at, and tossed back into my hands 3 months earlier, the gift that had humiliated me, was now the thing he was begging for, and I couldn't help but wonder why. I stared at him, unable to speak. The words didn't make sense. My son, the same boy who had laughed at me in front of his friends, who had sneered at the watch I'd given him, was now begging for it. I searched his eyes, trying to figure out if this was some kind of cruel joke, another way to make me look like a fool. But there was no laughter this time. His hands trembled on the table, his face pale, his eyes darting around the room like a hunted animal. "What did you say?" I asked quietly, leaning closer. "The watch," he repeated, his voice breaking. "The one you gave me. I need it." My mind spun. "Why now? You told me it was useless. You laughed at me." He shook his head violently, his palms slamming down on the table. "I know what I said." "I was wrong, okay? Please, just give it to me." His voice cracked, and for the first time in years, I saw tears glistening in his eyes. I folded my arms, steadying my tone even though my chest ached. "Daniel, you don't just get to humiliate someone and then demand what they gave you like it never happened. If you want it, you tell me why." He looked at me, his lips trembling, as though he was fighting a battle with himself. Then he exhaled shakily. "It's not just a watch, is it? You put something inside it." The air left my lungs. My hands tightened against my arms. "What are you talking about?" His voice dropped to a whisper, and he leaned forward, his words desperate. "I heard them, Dad. The guys at school, they know. They said it's worth money, that it's not just a stupid watch. One of them tried to follow me home today. He wants it. If I don't give it to him," he said. His voice faltered, cracking. "He said they'd make me regret it." I froze, trying to piece together his fragmented explanation. My watch. The gift. The thing I had chosen with so much care. How could anyone else even know about it? Unless... My thoughts drifted to the engraving. His initials, yes. But there was something else. Something I hadn't told him. I remembered the night I picked it up from the jeweler. The man had looked at me oddly when I requested the additional work. But he didn't ask questions. Hidden inside the back plate was a small, almost invisible engraving. A code only I knew. One that unlocked something far bigger than Daniel could have imagined. And suddenly, the pieces started to fit together. Someone must have noticed. Someone who knew what that watch meant. And now they were after my son. I rose from my chair slowly, every muscle in my body tense. "Daniel," I said firmly, "you tell me everything. From the beginning." He nodded quickly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He told me about a boy named Marcus, a senior, bigger than him. The kind of kid who always hovered at the edge of trouble. Daniel said Marcus had been hanging around more often, asking questions, making snide remarks. At first it was about his shoes, his backpack, stupid things. But then one day, Marcus had leaned close and whispered, "Where's that watch your old man gave you? The one with the code." At first, Daniel thought it was a prank. But then Marcus showed him a photo on his phone. A picture of the watch. My watch. The engraving. "Give it to me," Marcus had said, "or things will get ugly." I felt a cold rush of fury sweep through me. Someone had dug too deep. Someone had put their hands where they didn't belong. Daniel's voice broke into my thoughts. "Dad, please. I don't care what's in it, or what it means, or how much it's worth. I just want to be safe. Just give me the watch, and I'll hand it over, and it'll be done." I stared at him, my chest tightening. He thought this was about giving in, about surrendering. But I knew better. You don't hand over something like that and expect the threat to go away. Predators don't stop once they get a taste. They always come back for more. I placed my hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "No, son," I said, my voice low but firm. "If they want this watch, it's for a reason. And if you give it to them, you won't just be in danger, you'll be owned. They'll keep pushing, keep taking, until there's nothing left of you." He looked at me, his lips trembling. "Then what do we do?" I walked to the kitchen drawer, the one where I had placed the watch after that humiliating day. Slowly, I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in my palm. I turned it over, my thumb brushing against the engraving no one was supposed to notice. The secret hidden in plain sight. When I returned to him, his eyes locked onto the watch with an almost frantic hunger. But I didn't hand it over. "Not yet. You laughed when I gave you this," I reminded him, my voice heavy with memory. "You humiliated me, but now you're learning what it's worth. Not in money, not in fashion, but in truth. And if you want it, Daniel, you're going to have to earn it." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, his eyes wide. "What do you mean?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "It's time you learned what's inside this watch, and why men like Marcus will stop at nothing to get it." His breath caught. "What's inside it?" I smiled faintly, though my chest ached with the weight of the past. "A secret I've carried for 20 years. One I never thought I'd have to share." And as Daniel stared at me, trembling, desperate, I knew the time for silence had ended. Daniel's eyes were locked on mine, wide and frightened, but beneath that fear, I saw something else sparking to life. Curiosity. For years, he had looked at me as though I were just an aging, out-of-touch father. But now, in the dim glow of the kitchen light, he seemed to realize there were things about me he had never known. Things I had hidden away like buried bones. I set the watch on the table between us, the ticking second hand echoing faintly in the silence. "Before I tell you what's inside this," I said quietly, "you need to understand something about me. About the man I used to be before you were born." He frowned, confusion knitting his brows. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, my mind drifting to memories I hadn't dared revisit in years. "I wasn't always just your father, Daniel. I had another life once. A life I left behind when I met your mother, when I chose family over everything else. But in that life, I learned things. Dangerous things. Things that can't just be erased. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his hands curling against the table. "You're scaring me." "Good," I said firmly. "Because fear will keep you alive." I tapped the back of the watch with my finger. "Inside here is more than an engraving. It's a cipher, a code, and that code, if put into the wrong hands, could unlock information people would kill for." His lips parted, but no sound came out. He stared at the watch as if it were a bomb. "What kind of information?" he whispered. "The kind that topples men in suits. The kind that unravels fortunes built on blood. 20 years ago, I worked as a systems analyst for a private firm. We weren't government, but we were close enough. Too close. I stumbled on files that proved certain men were laundering money, billions, through shell companies that funded cartels and even wars. I didn't mean to find it. I just did. And when I realized what I was looking at, I knew I couldn't keep it buried." Daniel's face went pale. "So what did you do?" "I copied the data," I said simply. "Not all of it. Just enough to expose the truth, if anything ever happened to me. I hid the key in places no one would ever suspect, encoded in ways that looked ordinary. This watch, it was one of those places. A simple engraving that means nothing unless you know how to read it. I made sure only I could interpret it. But clearly, I trailed off, my jaw tightening. Someone has been digging. And now, they know." Daniel's hands trembled as he pointed at the watch. "And Marcus, he's after this because someone told him about it." "Exactly," I said grimly. "He's a pawn. Someone older, more dangerous, is pulling his strings. Marcus is just the dog they sent to sniff out the bone." The weight of it settled over us, heavy and suffocating. Daniel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as though trying to process what he'd just heard. "So what happens now? Do we go to the police?" I gave a bitter laugh. "Son, if I trusted the police, this would have been out in the open 20 years ago. Some of the names in those files are probably men sitting in government offices right now. No, this isn't about the law. This is about survival." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" I studied him for a long moment. This boy, who once mocked me in front of his friends, was now looking at me with the wide, terrified eyes of a child who suddenly realized his father was the only shield between him and the darkness. For the first time in years, I saw him not as the rebellious teenager he'd become, but as my son, my flesh, my blood, my responsibility. "We fight back," I said finally. "But not the way you think. We don't hand over the watch. We make them believe we will. And then we turn the game on them." Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "If Marcus is desperate enough to threaten you, then whoever's behind him is desperate too. They want this code because they believe it's the only piece left. But what they don't know is that the code in this watch isn't complete. It's just one part of a larger key. Without the rest, it's useless. So we're going to use that against them." His eyes widened. "A's bait." "Exactly," I said. "We let them think they've won. We draw them out into the open. And when they come for it, we'll be ready." Silence stretched between us. I could see the storm in his eyes, the fear, the doubt, the flicker of courage trying to break through. He had spent so long living in the shallow world of teenage games and popularity, but now he was being dragged into a reality where every choice could mean life or death. Finally, he whispered, "What do I need to do?" A surge of pride swelled in me, even as fear gnawed at my insides. "You follow my lead. You don't argue, you don't improvise, and you don't panic. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. This isn't a game, Daniel. This is survival. Do you understand? He nodded quickly, his jaw clenched tight. I understand. I picked up the watch, feeling its weight once more in my hand. The past I had tried so hard to bury was clawing its way back into my life, threatening the only thing I truly cared about. For years, Daniel had seen me as nothing more than his father, a man to mock, to rebel against, to take for granted. But now, for the first time, he was about to see the man I had once been. And if the shadows of my past wanted to come knocking at our door, then God help them. The night was restless. Daniel couldn't sleep, and neither could I. He paced his room like a caged animal, while I sat at the kitchen table, the watch in front of me, turning it over and over in my hands. Every second that ticked by was a reminder that someone out there knew about us, about me, and was waiting for their chance to strike. Around midnight, I heard the creak of the stairs. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his hair sticking to his forehead with sweat. "Dad," he whispered, his voice shaking. "There's someone outside." I was on my feet instantly. My pulse thundered in my ears as I grabbed the baseball bat leaning against the wall. I motioned for him to stay behind me and crept toward the front window. Carefully, I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. Then, in the faint glow of the street lamp, I spotted it. A figure leaning against a car across the street, cigarette ember glowing in the dark. Watching, waiting. "Stay away from the window," I hissed to Daniel, pulling the curtain shut. His breathing grew ragged. "Is it them?" "Yes," I said flatly. "And this is only the beginning." We stayed awake the rest of the night, the silence of the house broken only by the occasional crunch of gravel outside, footsteps circling, testing. They didn't come to the door. They didn't break in. They just wanted us to know they were there. It was psychological warfare, and it worked. By dawn, Daniel was trembling, his nerves frayed raw. That morning, over coffee that tasted like ash, I laid out the plan. "We're going to meet Marcus," I said. Daniel's head shot up. "What? No way." "Dad, he'll kill me." "Won't," I said firmly. "Not if we play this right. He thinks he has power because he's got muscle and fear on his side. But we've got something better. We have the watch. And I know how to use it." He swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" "We bait the hook. We set a meeting. You tell Marcus you'll give him the watch, but on our terms. Somewhere public, where his boss will be too paranoid to make a move. And when they show up, we'll see exactly who we're dealing with." Daniel's voice cracked. "And if they don't care about witnesses?" "Then I take care of it," I said darkly. He didn't argue after that. By afternoon, Daniel had worked up the courage to send a message to Marcus. It was shaky, riddled with typos, but believable. "I'll give you the watch. Tonight. At the old train station." The reply came fast. "Good. Don't be late." As the hours ticked by, Daniel grew paler, more withdrawn. I could see the storm inside him. Fear battling against something deeper. Something I hadn't seen in him before. Resolve. He was beginning to understand the gravity of what we were walking into, and though he was terrified, he didn't back out. For the first time, he wasn't laughing at me, mocking me, or treating me like some relic of the past. He was looking to me for strength. When night fell, we drove to the train station. The place had been abandoned for years, its windows shattered, the paint peeling from the walls. The silence there was suffocating, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the crunch of gravel under our shoes. I told Daniel to stay close, to keep his hands visible, to let me do the talking. We didn't wait long. Marcus appeared from the shadows, flanked by two older men I didn't recognize. Marcus smirked when he saw Daniel, but his eyes flickered nervously toward me. "You brought Daddy," he sneered. "Cute." I stepped forward, my body shielding Daniel. "Let's skip the theatrics. You want the watch, fine. But we're not handing it over until we know who's pulling your strings." One of the older men chuckled, a deep, gravelly sound that raised the hairs on my neck. He stepped into the light, his face scarred, his eyes cold. "Still the same stubborn bastard," he said. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice, knew it from the old days. "Reynolds," I said slowly. Daniel looked between us confused. You know him." "Oh, he knows me," Reynolds said, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "We used to work together, back when your old man was playing spy. Didn't he tell you? Didn't he tell you how he betrayed us all?" Daniel's mouth dropped open, but I didn't let Reynolds finish. "You're the one who betrayed everything," I snapped. "You were the reason I walked away. You were the reason I hid the files in the first place." Reynolds laughed, a sound as sharp as broken glass. "And now you're going to give them back to me." He extended a hand. "The watch." Daniel shifted behind me, panic radiating off him. "Dad." I held the watch up, its gleam catching in the dim light. Every eye locked onto it. Reynolds' men tensed. Marcus grinned like a dog waiting for a bone. And in that moment, I made my decision. "You want it," I said. "Come and take it." Then, with one sharp motion, I hurled the watch across the station floor. It clattered against the concrete, spinning wildly before skidding to a stop. Instantly, all eyes darted toward it. Marcus lunged forward, scrambling like a rat to snatch it up. And that's when I pulled Daniel's arm. "Run." We bolted into the shadows, our footsteps pounding against the hollow ground. Behind us, I heard shouts, the scrape of shoes, chaos as Marcus fought over the watch with Reynolds' men. Gunmetal flashed in the darkness. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty station. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps beside me. "Dad, what if they get it?" "They won't," I said, shoving him toward an exit. Because what I threw wasn't the real one. His eyes widened, shock and fear mixing into disbelief. "What?" I didn't have time to explain. Not yet. But the truth was simple. The watch they were fighting over was a decoy I had crafted years ago, for exactly this reason. The real one, the one with the code, was safe in my pocket. And if Reynolds wanted to play this game, then it was time I showed him I still knew how to win. We tore through alleyways, breath burning in our throats, the night pressing down like a hand on our shoulders. I could hear them behind us, shouts, the scrape of boots, curses. For a breathless second I thought we were done for, that my past had finally caught the son I'd tried to protect. But I had planned for this, for every possible way the night could twist. Years of living two lives taught you how to move when danger slid across your heels. We slipped through a service gate and into a narrow corridor between two buildings. The darkness swallowed us. Only the faint glow of a distant street lamp painted our faces in ghostly light. Daniel's hands shook against mine. His earlier bravado dissolved into raw terror. "Dad," he panted, "what now? Where are we going?" "Somewhere they won't think to look," I said, pushing him into a recessed doorway. My voice was calm for his sake, because panic would be contagious. "Keep low. Don't speak unless I say so." We pressed ourselves flat against the cold bricks, while footsteps thundered past, dangerously close. I could hear Reynolds barking orders. short, clipped syllables, and Marcus swearing like the immature bully he was. For a moment, their voices receded, and I let myself breathe. My mind raced. The decoy had worked too well. They'd fought over a fake because I wanted them to. But now I needed to use whatever advantage I had left to turn their fury into a trap. "You okay?" I whispered to Daniel. He nodded, swallowing hard. The boy who had once laughed at my watch was gone. In his place was something new, a rawness, an edge. The kind of focus that came when survival stripped everything else away. The transformation shocked me, proud and terrified all at once. We moved when the noise faded, sticking to shadows and back streets. I led him to an old service door I knew from my younger days. Used to be a safe house, abandoned now, but the lock still open with the push of the right tool. The smell of mildew and stale coffee hit us as we stepped inside. It was cramped, but it was ours for the moment. I pushed a false panel and handed Daniel a battered backpack. "Take this," I said. Inside were a change of clothes, a burner phone, and a wad of cash. "Listen to me carefully. I'm going to call someone who owes me a debt." He swallowed his fear and did as I asked. I felt like a conductor of a desperate orchestra, each movement measured, precise. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years and waited, my thumb drumming against the phone. When the voice answered, low and surprised, I nearly laughed with relief. Old friends are sometimes the most dangerous people to cross. And sometimes they're the only ones who can hold the line. "You still owe me a favor," I said after the pleasantries. "I need it now." There was a pause, and then a dry chuckle. "You always call at the worst times." "Where?" I told him. And within an hour a van pulled up outside the safe house. 3 men, reliable faces from the past, jumped out. No questions, no pity, just action. They had their own reasons to hate Reynolds, and that made them valuable. We moved like ghosts, slipping back toward the train station to see what chaos remained. When we arrived, the scene was a smear of confusion. Reynolds' men were scattered, nursing bruises and egos. Marcus lay on a bench with a bloody lip, muttering curses. The decoy watch glinted in the mud, where someone had thrown it in anger. I watched from the shadows as they argued over blame, pulling at each other's loyalties. Reynolds barked orders, but his eyes kept flicking to where he thought the real prize might be. He was rattled, and that's when we struck. My old friends moved with quiet efficiency. They cut off the routes of retreat, slipped silencers on pistols, secured exits. We weren't there to start a bloodbath. I still wanted to capture, to expose, not to become the kind of monster who solved violence with more violence. But we needed to take control. I signaled to Daniel, who nodded, his expression a mask of determination that made me realize how much he'd changed in these few harrowing hours. I stepped out from the shadows, hands raised, voice steady. "Reynolds." The name landed heavy in the abandoned station, and heads snapped toward me. He straightened at the sound, fury twisting his face. "You again," he spat. "You think you can just—" "I think I can do what I should have done years ago." I interrupted. "I think I can end this." He laughed, an ugly, empty sound, then reached for a gun. One of my allies misread the movement and fired, the shot ringing through the night. Chaos erupted. In the flurry, I moved toward Reynolds, and so did Daniel, like a shadow mirroring my steps. The world narrowed to that one man, to the breath between us. In the scramble, Reynolds fell, not dead, but wounded enough to stop him. We bound him and handed him off to the men I'd called in. I looked at the young bully Marcus, who suddenly seemed small and frightened. He stammered apologies, tried to crawl back into whatever protection he'd once been promised. But the protection was gone. The puppet strings had been cut. We didn't hand Reynolds to the police. That would have been naive. Instead, we made sure there were eyes on him, men who knew how to ruin him without leaving the hint of my involvement. I wanted Reynolds to be exposed in the way that mattered most, economically and socially, so his allies would scatter and his name would rot in rooms where it had once opened doors. I placed his smug little empire on the road to collapse, the same way he'd helped build the infrastructure that needed to fall. That night, as dawn crept over the horizon, we sat on the rooftop of the safe house and watched the city wake. Daniel was quiet, exhausted, his face shadowed with the weight of what we'd done. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You did good," I said softly. "You were brave." He looked at me then, really looked, the same way a son might look at a father who finally let him into the truth. "I laughed at you," he murmured, voice thick. "I was ashamed of being small, of being me. I didn't understand what you were trying to protect." "You were a kid," I replied. "Kids are cruel because they don't know better. But you learned tonight. Not because I lectured you, but because you felt it. That's different. That's real." He swallowed, eyes stinging. "What about the files? The rest of the key?" "What now?" I smiled, a tired, half-broken thing. "Now we finish it. We take the rest of what's hidden, and we make sure Reynolds' masters have nowhere left to hide." He nodded, a shard of steel in his gaze. "Then let's finish it." As the city lit up around us, I realized the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But the boy who once laughed at my gift had become a man who would stand beside me, shoulder to shoulder, in the war my younger self had started. The quiet between us wasn't the same as before. It was full of unspoken understanding. A pact forged in fear and fire. We spent the next week like men on a clock, every minute measured, every move calculated. My old contacts worked quietly in the background, safe transfers, careful leaks to journalists, whispers to watchdogs who still remembered how to dig. The files I'd hidden were scattered across the city in little pieces, each one useless alone, but lethal when joined. Reynolds' network was already fraying. Clients pulled their accounts, lawyers folded, and the men who had once closed doors for him now gave him the cold shoulder. The world he'd built on fear and favors began to creak and collapse under its own rot. But collapsing an empire of corruption is never clean. Threats came in drips and then in waves. Anonymous texts with photos of our house, a smashed window at the safe house, a late night engine idling across the street. Reynolds was wounded but not finished. He had pride and enough ignorance to keep him dangerous. I learned to sleep in short bursts, to trust my eyes when they said danger was near, and my instincts when they told me to move. Daniel learned too. He learned what it meant to be watched, what it meant to sit in a room and wait while decisions about other people's lives were made. He learned not because I told him, but because the world taught him with a blunt, unforgiving hand. One afternoon, the journalist called. We met in a small cafe, the kind that kept its blinds half closed. The reporter's hands trembled slightly as she slid the envelope across the table. Inside were copies of the files, cleaned, organized, and formatted for public consumption. Her eyes were dark with the kind of fatigue that comes from keeping the world honest for a living. "This will blow up," she said simply. "You sure you want to do this?" I thought of the boy who had laughed at the watch, who had turned his back on me in front of his friends. I thought of Marcus scrambling on that bench, of Reynolds' smug face when he thought he had the upper hand. I thought of all the nameless people who had suffered because men like Reynolds were allowed to move money like it was wind. Yes. Do it. The fallout was swift. Newspapers ran the story with bold headlines. The broadcast news chased it through prime time. Regulatory bodies opened investigations. Men who had traded morality for profit found themselves facing subpoenas. Reynolds' name, once whispered with reverence in the right rooms, became a taunt. He lost accounts, access, and allies faster than he could muster denials. The arrogance that had carried him for decades was gone, replaced by pleading and legal maneuvering. I watched it all from the roof of the safe house, with Daniel at my side, the city stretching out like a confession below us. He turned to me then, the boy who'd become a man under the pressure of the last few days. There were lines etched into his face I'd never seen before. Tired, older, more honest. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. Not whether the world was better, but whether the cost was justified. I understood the question. My life had been split open again. Enemies had been made, our safety had been gambled. I wrapped my arm around him. It had to be, I said. There are things you don't walk away from. There are debts that aren't money, but conscience. We paid them, even if the cost is ours to carry. He nodded, then reached for the watch I still kept hidden beneath my shirt. The real one. The one with the code that could topple men. Had never left my person, unless it was to be copied by my own hands. He touched it with reverence now, as if feeling the pulse of history beneath the metal. I laughed at you, he murmured. I thought I knew what mattered. I was so small. You weren't small, I said. You were growing. And you still are. He hesitated, then did something that made my heart lurch, and then swell. He handed the watch back to me. Keep it, he said. Or give it to me when you think I'm ready. But whatever happens, I don't want it to be the thing that defines me. I want it to be the thing that reminds me. For a long moment, I held the weight of that metal against my palm, thinking about all the ways life teaches us. Through gifts and humiliation, through threats and protection, through choices that carve us into who we will become. I thought of his laugh in that living room, sharp and careless. I thought of his fear at the kitchen table when he had first begged. And I thought of the way he'd stood on that rooftop, steady now, not asking to be shielded, but offering to stand with me. We'll bury the code, I said at last. Not forever. Truth can't be hidden indefinitely. But for now, we'll make sure it's safe. When you're older, when you've learned more than I ever could teach you standing over a stove or watching a game, we'll decide what to do. For now, we live. We make new rules. He looked at me, and the years between us seemed to fold inward. Promise me one thing, he said. No more secrets. If there's something, tell me. Don't make me find out the hard way. I wanted to tell him that secrets had been the armor I wore when the world was too brutal to enter unshielded. I wanted to say that some secrets were gifts and some were bombs. But I could see the truth in his face. The same truth I'd once had and lost in the fog of my other life. So I nodded. No more secrets, I promised. We watched the city until the light turned gold, and in that slow, gilded hour something like peace settled over us. The world would keep spinning, and men like Reynolds would find new angles to claw their way back. But the most dangerous thing in the world, I had learned, wasn't power or money. It was people willing to tell the truth, even if it cost them everything. At night, when the house finally felt like home again, I took the watch from the drawer where I kept the decoys and the copies. I opened the backplate and, with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the memory of blood and years. I slid the tiny code into its hiding place. This time I didn't engrave it. This time I wrapped it in a photograph of a younger me, and a woman with laughing eyes. His mother. And slipped both into the envelope I buried in the ground beneath the old maple in our backyard. When Daniel asked why, I only said, "So you'll know why I did what I did." For years from now, he might dig it up with a shovel and a steady hand, or he might never want to see it again. But in that quiet moment, watching him fall asleep with a kind of exhausted contentment I hadn't seen since he was small, I knew one thing with brutal clarity. The gift I'd given him that day had always been more than a watch. It was a lesson in pride and humility, in the cost of keeping secrets, and in the strange, fractured way love sometimes looks like foolishness. I kissed the crown of his head and whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry. For the laughter, for the hiding, for everything. But I'm glad you were there when the world came back for me." He smiled in his sleep, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe that redemption wasn't a destination, but a series of choices made in the small, noisy moments between fear and bravery.